To jump straight in and to start talking about Daniel chapter 11 might quickly make people want to click off of this site when they hear such a line of talk. What is Daniel 11? What is Daniel chapter 11? Why is this so important? Many these days trying to understand the end times and where it's all going. How many people are reading Daniel chapter 11? Why on earth should we even read or care about Daniel chapter 11? Well, it's a very important chapter. It's a very mysterious chapter. It's a chapter that you need to look into. Why? Because Jesus said so. Well, let's quickly look at the words of Jesus, and Jesus drawing our attention to Daniel chapter 11 in Matthew chapter 24. And so you have Jesus speaking here, and he's saying in verse 11, "And many false prophets shall rise and shall deceive many." So these are the last days, and you have many false prophets. "And because iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall wax cold." Is the love of many waxing cold? Yes, indeed it is. "But he that shall endure unto the end, the same shall be saved." So endure here means it's going to be tough times from now onwards. We're in the last days. The love of many are waxing cold. There are many false prophets, many telling us which way to go and interpreting the times. But there's much imbalance among these various preachers and teachers and prophets and false prophets. But we can all agree on certain points that we're all headed for tough times, even if you're not that way inclined. Even if you don't look into or believe in anything spiritual, one thing is for sure, we're all headed for tough times. And so Jesus goes on to say, "But he that shall endure unto the end." So you're going to need a lot of endurance in the last days, and that too would be something we can all agree on. "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world." Well, don't forget when Jesus said these words, he was talking to only 12 disciples at the time. And all of this was new to people back then, but now the gospel, the things Jesus said, have snowballed all around the world. And we have a generation now where everyone has heard the gospel. We have a generation where the gospel is preached even on here on the internet and all over the world, because we have this communication now whereby we can communicate in split seconds with each other all around the world. So the gospel is indeed, we can all agree on that, whether you believe in the gospel, whether you believe in Jesus, then we'd all have to agree that the gospel has indeed been preached into all the world, these being the signs of the times. "And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall the end come." Well, we're living in a day and age where the gospel is indeed being heard and preached to in all the world. Everyone's heard of Jesus these days, in all quarters, and the most every country in the world has heard about Jesus. Points to the words of Jesus coming true, because you're going to wonder if all of this is true, which indeed it is, and are we living in the last days? And so Jesus goes on to talk and say, he's talking about the last days. His disciples had asked him, "What shall be the sign of thy coming?" So we're living in the day and age with all of these signs, these various signs pointing to the second coming of Jesus Christ. Jesus saying the generation witnessing these things be the one, that generation that witnesses all these signs. That generation will be the generation that indeed sees Jesus coming back in the clouds of heaven. Well, Jesus goes on to say, now this is a sign that hasn't been fulfilled yet. So though we're in the end times, there's still some great signs that yet have to be fulfilled. And so here's Jesus in short and largely telling us to look into the prophecies of Daniel. And the prophecies of Daniel in particular, you think, well, where do we find these words that Jesus is about to say here? So in verse 15 of Matthew, When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation. Now, abomination of desolation would mean an idol that they're going to place in the Middle East. So, in other words, we're talking about the image of the beast, a super duper computerized image of the beast, the beast being the Antichrist, which they're going to place in the holy place in the Middle East. Jesus says what it says here, when ye shall see this abominable idol, in other words, this abomination of desolation, it's an idol that will bring the world not into peace and security, but will bring the world into great trouble. The point in placing this abomination of desolation, this abominable idol, this image of the beast, this image of the beast being a man, the Antichrist being that man, this man of sin, placing an image of this man of sin in the holy place, and him assuming the role of God in the holy place. So what a better place to place an image of yourself if you assume that you are now God. So placing your image in the holy place and sitting in the very temple of God, the Holy Lands being the land of Israel, building a temple there to God and then sitting in it, proclaiming you are God to the world would give people some kind of perception of reality that you are indeed saying that you are God, seeing as you are sat there in the house of God, showing yourself that you are God and having a super duper computerized image of yourself placed in the holy place. You can see why the cherry on the cake here would be the holy place in the land of Israel and Jerusalem, God's capital on earth, and the temple bill as being God's symbolic house on earth. And so sat in that temple would give people, secular people, spiritual people, a perception of reality that what you're saying is, good sir, is that you are now God. You're sat in the temple of God, showing yourself that you are God and placing a super duper computerized image of yourself in the holy place. Well, this in everyday language is what this means. And Jesus saying, when ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. He then goes on to say that it's a time that his children would have to flee. Curse when we see this abomination, in other words, this abomination that maketh desolate, when they place this image of the beast, this abomination of desolation, it's going to not trigger off a time of peace and security and safety and happiness and unity amongst nations for the world. It's going to do just the opposite. Far from bring peace and security and happiness to all, and a time of peace, security and plenty to all, and no more wars, it's going to do just the opposite. And so it's called an abomination of desolation. In other words, it's the abomination that maketh desolate. It's the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet. Well, Jesus telling us, when ye shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Now, in brackets, in this verse 15 here in Matthew 24, you're going to read, whoso readeth, let him understand. So you think, well, I guess I need to look into the prophecies of Daniel and see if I can find these same words in the prophecies of Daniel. Jesus going on to say, for then, right then, when we see this abomination of desolation, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. Well, two major verses there. One talking about seeing the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, let him that readeth understand, and the other telling us what kind of what this is going to do for the world, largely politically. And therefore there be a time of great tribulation, for then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. Well, maybe you've heard different people on here talking about the Great Tribulation. Well, the one who coined the phrase, the Great Tribulation, and said it first, you go to the one who said it first, was indeed Jesus Christ. So when we see this abomination of desolation standing in the holy place, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, let him that readeth understand, then shall be great tribulation. Well, if you see a tsunami or you read of a tsunami coming, wouldn't it be wise to understand when and how and what that tsunami is and how high that wave's going to be and when it's going to appear and how long we've got until it hits the seashore? So we're looking at the signs of the times here. We're doing our best to interpret the times as coming from the words of Jesus. And the disciples asking him, what shall be the sign of thy coming? And Jesus talking about these various signs and largely pointing to a major sign of the end time, which would indeed be the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, this major sign bringing the world into great tribulation, so much so that those days, except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. But the days are shortened when Jesus Christ comes back to this earth to straighten this damn mess all out. This damn mess that we're all in will snowball and spiral, and they will indeed place this abomination of desolation, this image of the beast, in the holy place, and a man of sin will appear and assume the role of God on this earth. Well, begs the question, Jesus telling us to look into the prophecies of Daniel. Well, where do we find these words of Jesus? You find them in Daniel chapter 11. Well, to say Daniel chapter 11 might be a little bit black and white, because you have Daniel chapter 10, Daniel chapter 11, and Daniel chapter 12. These all are one book. And of course, the interpreters and writers of the Bible that have conducted and put the Bible together have separated these various scrolls into different chapters. Well, Daniel 10, 11, and 12 would have all been written on one scroll. So they've now separated these into these three chapters. But we're largely going to concentrate on Daniel chapter 11. But it has to be said that Daniel was praying to get further understanding of all of these various visitations that he'd been given. And so the angel eventually breaks through to Daniel. After Daniel prays for 3 weeks, the angel breaks through from the spirit world into this world and starts to give him understanding, this largely understanding that Jesus talks about, let him that readeth understand. So we're largely looking at Daniel chapter 11, and when we go to Daniel chapter 11, few understand it. And it's one of the most mysterious chapters in the Bible. But no wonder in brackets in Daniel 24 it says, let him that readeth understand. So in other words, it's crucial and so important that we understand Daniel chapter 11. Well, if you go on into Daniel chapter 12, it says, they that understand amongst the people shall instruct many, which points to the reality that people are going to begin to understand Daniel chapter 11 in the last days. Jesus said, seek and ye shall find. So if we seek and search and we trust that we're going to be led into all truth, if we have Jesus in our heart, if we've asked Jesus to baptize us with the Holy Ghost and with fire, and we believe that God's holy and pure Spirit, the Spirit of God, the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost, will indeed lead and guide us into all truth, then we can only seek and search out God's truths of Daniel chapter 11, and ask for further understanding. Well, to start off here, in Daniel chapter 11, the words of Jesus appear here in Daniel chapter 11, verse 31, where it indeed talks about the abomination of desolation. So Jesus talking about the abomination of desolation, and it's saying, look into the prophecies of Daniel. Well, your first line here would be to find the words "the abomination of desolation" in the various chapters of that Daniel wrote, and indeed it comes up in Daniel chapter 11. And so it says in verse 31, "An arm shall stand on his part." Arms here would mean war, right? An arm shall stand on his part. His here would be the Antichrist. "An arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength." Well, pollute the sanctuary of strength means he's going to go into a temple that's built for God in this chapter. So we're assuming here that the Jews will rebuild their temple, and so you'll have the third temple. If the Antichrist enters into the temple, through military muscle and might, "An arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength." In other words, the high priest was the only one largely that went into the temple and went behind the curtain there in the holy place. Well, the Antichrist is going to indeed go into the temple that they're going to rebuild, the holy place. "An arm shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice." In other words, take away the religious animal sacrificial worship of the Jews, and place the abomination of desolation. So here's the words, "the abomination of desolation." "They shall place the abomination that maketh desolate." So this is where the words appear. In other words, Jesus saying, "When ye shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place." Well, the abomination of desolation comes up in this chapter, in verse 31. Arms standing on the part of the Antichrist. So you're picturing some kind of a war whereby the Antichrist and his forces invade Israel, invade Jerusalem, invade the temple, and pollute the sanctuary of strength, and take away the daily sacrifice. In other words, the daily animal sacrificial worship of the Jews, and place the abomination of desolation. So, "and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate." Well, again, just reading that one verse might take a bit of understanding and getting your head around the King James version here being written in Old English. And the problem is here, these new translations don't always make better reading, in that they have their various interpretations and written in plain English of what it's saying here. But of course, again, you read the various interpretations, and many have various different interpretations. The best thing to do, of course, is go to him who said it first, because this is Jesus. And Jesus is the one who coined the phrase, "the abomination of desolation," telling us to look into the prophecy of Daniel. Jesus is the one who told us that when we see the abomination of desolation, then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. And except those days should be shortened, there should no flesh be saved. So it begs the question, what on earth does Daniel chapter 11, what is it really all about? What is it saying? If this is the chapter that we need to look into, and it's one of the most mysterious chapters in the Bible, then we really do need to start praying and asking God, asking Jesus to help us to understand. Let him that readeth understand. Now it's telling you in Daniel, in Matthew 24, let him that readeth understand. So we should be able to understand. And so let's simply go back to these Daniel chapter 10. All of this, don't forget, is one book, Daniel 10, 11, and 12. We're looking more into Daniel chapter 11. Well, the angel appears to Daniel, and then we're in Daniel chapter 10 now. And we're in verse 12. So the angel is talking to Daniel. Let's go to verse 10 here. "And behold, an hand touched me." This is Daniel, right? "Which set me upon my knees and upon the palms of mine hands." So an angel's hand touches Daniel in short, and he's on his hands and knees, not for a loop by this vision that he was given in Daniel chapter 10. "And behold, an hand touched me, which set me upon my knees and upon the palms of my hands." So he's lying flat on the floor, and an angel touches him. And you now picture him on all fours. And he said unto me, O Daniel, a man greatly beloved, understand the words that I speak unto thee, and stand upright. So he suddenly stands upright, for unto thee am I now sent. And when he had spoken this word unto me, I stood trembling. So Daniel has stood trembling in front of this most powerful visitation, an angel. And the angel has come for what? The angel has come to give him understanding. Then said he unto me, Fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that thou didst set thine heart to understand. Well, what are we doing here? We're setting our hearts to understand. Let him that readeth understand. Did Daniel want to understand? Yes, Daniel's praying for further understanding. He'd had various visitations in Daniel chapter 7, Daniel chapter 8, Daniel chapter 9. And now he's having another visitation. We're looking at Daniel 10, 11 and 12, and they're all one book. In Daniel 10 here, the angel's explaining to him why he's come. He's come in answer to Daniel's prayer. What's Daniel praying for? He's praying for further understanding. Then said he unto me, Fear not, Daniel, for from the first day that thou didst set thine heart to understand. Something we're trying to do here, to understand. And to chasten thyself before thy God. So he's sobered up. He's chastening himself before God, in other words, which would mean he's sobering up. He's very serious about this. He really does want to understand. But from the first day that thou didst set thine heart to understand, and to chasten thyself before thy God, thy words were heard, and I am come for thy words. So this is why the angel has come, to give him further understanding. So there's a lot said here in Daniel chapter 10, which is extremely important. Really, largely what's happening here is the angel is introducing himself to Daniel after Daniel had been praying for 3 years, for 3 whole weeks. No doubt he'd been praying for years anyway, but in this particular occasion, for 3 whole weeks. And finally, this angel breaks through to give Daniel this most powerful chapter, one of the most powerful chapters that Daniel's ever given in all of his praying for understanding in the writings of Daniel. So we're now going to jump straight into Daniel chapter 11, the most mysterious chapter in the book, in the writings of Daniel. So the angel goes on to speak. He's clearly come to give Daniel understanding, and we too are trying to understand Daniel chapter 11. Let him that readeth understand. So this is what the angel goes on to say. So right at the end of Daniel chapter 10 here, verse 21, the last verse in that chapter, but I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth. And there is none that holdeth with me in these things but Michael your prince. So this angel was sent to Daniel, and Michael the prince comes to assist him in bringing this most powerful message to Daniel. And Daniel writing it down for who? Writing it down for our day and age, for our generation, for the last days, for the end time generation. So he's come to give him these words, and he's come to give him these words for the latter days. It's not so much for Daniel's day, though some of it would be, but largely the angel has come to give Daniel this message for a latter day generation, talking of the last days here. And Michael the archangel was sent to assist this angel, which I choose to believe is Gabriel, in bringing this message across from the spirit world to this world, to Daniel. This angel in the spirit world having the fight of the prince over Persia, an devil over Persia, one of the devil's archangels, and finally breaking through with this message, and Michael the archangel assisting him in this. This is what he's saying in this one verse, verse 21. But I will show thee that which is noted in the scripture of truth. So this is scripture. And there is none that holdeth with me in these things but Michael your prince. So bringing this message across, you picture this angel in short kind of coming across from the spirit world. Let's imagine he has a scroll in his hand. He's a messenger, and the word angel indeed means messenger. So Michael the archangel assists this angel fighting of this prince over Persia, this archangel over Persia, and the angel finally breaking through with this message to Daniel, not only to Daniel, but to an end time generation, to God's children in the last days. And he's come to give not only Daniel understanding, but also to give us understanding in the last days. So it has to be remembered when we read these words that we're indeed reading these words as brought to Daniel via an angel. And what's Daniel doing here? He's just writing these things down. So this is what the angel, in fact, is saying. It's not Daniel saying this. It's an angel of God, a high up angel, the angel Gabriel, no doubt, bringing this message to Daniel. So this is the angel speaking, verse 1, 11:1. Also I, in the first year of Darius, don't forget it's the angel, the Mede, even I, stood to confirm and to strengthen him. So in other words, you got Darius the Mede. It was the Daniel's under the Media Persian Empire, the Median Persia Empire being a Jew empire. And the angel is saying that he indeed stands in the spirit, he stood in the spirit world to strengthen Darius the Mede. So over these various kings and kingdoms on earth, there are indeed angels. There are archangels of God, this one acknowledging that he stood to strengthen Darius. Darius was good for God's people and helped God's people and furthered Daniel in his cause. But you take the prince over Persia here in this chapter, and he would have opposed Daniel. He opposed Daniel's prayer. You had Daniel praying for 3 whole weeks. And this angel battling it out with this prince, this archangel of Satan over Persia, and trying to stop this message from breaking through to Daniel. So this angel saying to Daniel that he stood to strengthen Darius. And I also, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. So Darius, in other words, had an angel working with him, and this angel in the spirit world is the same one that's bringing Daniel this message. You have to remember that Daniel's high up in the Media Persian Empire, and so indeed he had angels working with him and strengthening the kingdom that he was often in. He would often be under Darius, or he'd often be under the Persian side of the empire. Verse 10 here, chapter 10 here, verse 1, in the 3rd year of Cyrus, king of Persia, a thing was revealed unto Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar. So he's kind of under the Persian side of the empire here. And the archangel over this empire trying to stop this message from getting through. But finally this message gets through with the help of Michael the archangel. And the angel is saying that in the verse 1, right? Also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. So angels do indeed sometimes confirm and strengthen kings, is what it's saying in short. And now, now I will show thee the truth. Sometimes I wonder if there's a devil attacking my throat. You try to speak these words, and you think to yourself, well, the devil certainly doesn't want these words coming through. God certainly does. I have an affliction with my throat and my lungs, and this affliction frequently prevents me and doesn't help me or assist me in my talking. But God willing, even so, you can rise above these afflictions and speak God's words as coming from the scriptures and coming from the spiritual, God willing. So the angel goes on to say in verse 2, this will take a bit of time, and the snag is that usually on here you haven't got a lot of time, but we're in chapter 28 minutes in already. So for those who are serious about understanding these things, this is for them. The majority of the people wouldn't have the time of day with this old codger bucking on about scriptures. So, but to seek further understanding, you have to listen to someone, and God willing, you do your best to look into these things. And lastly, what you're doing here is looking into history. Now, I'm not a historian, But of course, it pays to have some understanding of history, and so you indeed do need to look into history. Is not, you can't spend all day long reading history, but this Bible, this angel is indeed giving history before it happens. He's talking about the future, and he's telling Daniel what's going to happen before it happens. He told Daniel of the Medo-Persian Empire. He's told Daniel of the Grecian Empire. He's told Daniel of the Roman Empire. And he tells Daniel of the Antichrist world empire, and he also tells Daniel of the second coming of Jesus Christ. So far, in all of these visitations to Daniel, not one word is found in all these. This is the most accurate prophecy, book of prophecies in the whole Bible, and many Bible scholars and believers all agree largely on the writings of Daniel, that Daniel indeed prophesied Medo-Persia, dual world empire. He indeed prophesied the Grecian Empire. He indeed prophesied the Roman Empire. He will indeed prophesy the Antichrist empire when that happens. So all of these other world empires that Daniel, this angel, prophesied through Daniel, bringing these messages to Daniel and bringing a light to Daniel, informing him and telling him of these various world empires that would indeed come in, these various time periods and ages that would indeed roll on until the second coming of Jesus Christ. And so the angel is giving Daniel further understanding here. And so now he goes on in verse 2, and now I will show thee the truth, right? He's telling the truth. This is all scripture. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia. Don't forget, Daniel was in Persia here, and you picture Daniel writing this down. So 3 more kings will stand up in Persia, and no doubt, if people look into history, this indeed did happen. And the 4th, this is telling you history before it even happens. And the 4th shall be far richer than they all, and by his strength and through his riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. So you have the Medo-Persian Empire, right, and the Persian side of the empire here. You have this 4th king. Stand up yet 3 kings in Persia. And the 4th shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, right? By his strength and through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. So you picture here this 4th king of Persia. War is now looming in the air. He no doubt observes that the king over Grecia is planning some kind of a war against him. Well, this is all history, because this king over Grecia is indeed Alexander the Great. And this is the angel telling Daniel even of Alexander the Great from the realm of Grecia, the king of Grecia, the king of Greece. In other words, telling Daniel who and what the next incoming world empire is going to be. The Medes and the Persian Empire is going to be toppled, will tumble and fall and foul, will be taken over, in short, by Alexander the Great. So another great world empire coming in, which will replace the Medes and Persian Empire. So this is what the angel's talking about. He's talking to Daniel, who's at the top of the Persian side of the Medo-Persian Empire. And he's telling him that this is all going to be toppled by Alexander the Great. And indeed it was. So when you read these prophecies and you see the absolute accuracy of them, you find yourself thinking, wow, the most powerful and the most accurate prophecies fulfilled in the whole Bible was the writings of Daniel. Indeed, all of these great world empires have come into play just as the angels said they would. And the mighty king, so this is the king of Grecia, this 4th king in Persia has an inkling, and no doubt there's a stir in the air because war is in the air. And he knows the king of Grecia is planning to attack him. So what does he do? He's richer than all of the other kings. He muscles up all of his muscle and might and his riches. And he puts all of these into weapons of war to fight off, to stave off this attack from the king of Grecia. But it doesn't work. So a mighty king, so the angel goes on in verse 3, a mighty king shall stand up. that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. Well, you read up on this and you read up on history, and like I say, I'm not going to make out that I'm some great historian, but if you read up on this, you'll find that there's a great war fought between Alexander the Great and this king of Persia. And Alexander the Great was actually outnumbered 10-1, they say. But of course, this goes to show that prophecy has to be fulfilled, and though Alexander the Great was outnumbered 10-1, this fourth king in Persia, muscling up all of his muscle might, putting all of his money and his power into all of these, no doubt, in these armies and weapons of war to stave off this attack from Alexander the Great, Greece coming in. Alexander the Great outnumbered 10-1. Well, Alexander the Great had prophecy on his side. You'd say, well, had God ordained this to happen on this side, it had been written in prophecy. And though you outnumber the incoming world empire and king 10-1, this is going to fail. God's words will always succeed. So though they were outnumbered 10-1 in this great battle, Alexander the Great indeed won the war here. So it goes on, verse 3, and a mighty king shall stand up, this is Alexander the Great, that shall rule with great dominion, and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken. Alexander the Great, you read, died at age 32. He died at a young age. He'd conquered the known world in that day in only 10 years. And at the height of his career, of all things, he dies of some kind of an illness at age only 32. So all of this prophesied before it even happened. Right down to the last detail of Alexander the Great, and when he shall stand up, right, he's strong now, he's overtaken the known world right out there, largely you're talking about in the Middle East, the known world out there. The rest of the world you think were largely unknown back then. Here's the angel talking to Daniel, talking about the world that Daniel would have understood. You're largely looking at the Middle East and that kind of area, the known world. And when he shall stand up, when Alexander the Great stands up, his kingdom shall be broken, Alexander the Great dies, and shall be divided toward the four winds, right? So he dies, and his kingdom is now going to be divided toward the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity. In other words, not to his children. Usually you'll go on to read in this chapter 11, of how these various kings stand up, these generals indeed stand up, and indeed it underlines four of them. So in other words, when Alexander the Great dies, and when his kingdom when he shall stand up, Alexander the Great, right, his kingdom shall be broken. In other words, he dies, and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity. In other words, not his children. You'll read on in this chapter how one king stands up and he dies, and his son takes over, that one dies, and his son takes over. So you have these kind of dynasties, the kingdoms largely kept in the family. This is very relevant to understanding Daniel chapter 11. You read of how they kept this in the family, and one dad would die and the son would take over, then he would die and his son would take over. This is very relevant to understanding this chapter. Well, when Alexander the Great died, it says, when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, dies age 32, and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven, and not to his posterity. In other words, it wasn't handed over to his children, it's handed over to his generals on his deathbed. And not to his posterity, nor according to his dominion. Well, Alexander the Great had a great world empire, and now he's handing this great world empire down to his generals, which not according to the dominion which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others beside those. So, in other words, we read in the prophecies of Daniel chapter 11 how these four horns would stand up in place of Alexander the Great. And these being the four generals, you look at history and you'll find that four generals take over. It's well known that the generals took over, not his children, the generals took over and sliced up Alexander the Great's kingdom and didn't rule in the same power and might as Alexander the Great. In fact, they ended up at war with each other. And we're largely looking at the two main players of these last days, of the days after, in fact, the fall of Alexander the Great when he died, and this great world empire of Alexander the Great handed down to his four generals, and these four generals battling it out for dominion of the whole realm. But largely it breaks this down because the two main players now turn out to be the king of the north of Israel in fact, and king of the south. So the kingdom is for his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others beside those. So not given to his children, but handed down to his four generals. And now the angel goes on in verse 5. And the king of the south shall be strong. So the angel is talking to Daniel. Daniel's concerned for his own land and his own people, the land of Israel. And so the angel's talking about the king of the south. So in other words, we're talking south of Israel. So, and the king of the south shall be strong. So this general that goes south, in fact, it's going to be Egypt. South of Israel is Egypt. And the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, right, this other prince that's talking about here is the king of the north. So one of these generals is strong north of Israel, and the other general is strong south of Israel. The general that's stronger in the north of Israel is Seleucus the First, and the general that's strong in the south of Israel will be Ptolemy, as he's called. So you have the Ptolemaic Empire in the south and the Seleucid Empire in the north. This is largely the king of the north, king of the south scenario that breaks out in after the death of Alexander the Great. And eventually we'll go on to introduce the Prince of the Covenant. So you have the land of Israel back then caught up in the middle of these various wars that would break out between the king of the north, the Seleucids, and the king of the south, the Ptolemaic Empire, which largely has its roots in Egypt. The king of the north appears to largely have its roots in Syria. So in short, we're going to say Syria versus Egypt. Though the Seleucid Empire in the north would have had Iraq, Iran, Lebanon, and all of these various other countries, Kuwait even, and Turkey, all of these countries come up in association with the Seleucid Empire in the north. But the empire in the north would eventually dwindle down to Syria. So you kind of picture Syria as being the kind of main place in the north, the main headquarters in the north, if you like. Back then it would have been so on it goes. So anyway, the king of the south shall be strong, so we're saying Egypt. And one of his princes, so this other prince is the king of the north, which we're going to say is Syria for short, the Seleucid Empire in the north, and the Ptolemaic Empire in the south. And he shall be, the king of the north, right, shall be strong above him. So the strongest of the two is going to be the king of the north. The king of the north, in fact, had many more countries under the Seleucid world empire than did the Egyptian Ptolemaic Empire. So you picture the king of the north maybe had a greater empire than the king of the south, but not as strong or as powerful as Alexander the Great's empire was. So a broken empire with the king of the north, king of the south, king in the east, in fact, general in the east, general in the west. But the writings of Daniel in chapter 11 here largely concentrating on the Seleucid Empire in the north and the Ptolemaic Empire in the south. So Syria in the north and Egypt in the south for sure. But many more countries in the north under the Seleucid world empire, like I say, you read up on this and you find Iraq, Iran, and all these various countries, Syria, of course, and Lebanon and Jordan, Turkey, and the Levant. You look into that, and you've got Israel. They're all under the influence or power of the Seleucid empire in the north. So he shall be strong above him, above the kingdom of the south, and have dominion, and his dominion shall be a great dominion. Again, you look into this, and it bears out in history. In fact, the dominion of the king of the north, the Seleucid Empire in the north, appears to have ruled over many more countries than the king of the south. And largely the king of the south, it simply talks of Egypt. King of the north, you look into this, you look at, like I say, at these various countries, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Turkey, if not parts of Turkey, Israel, the Levant, and Afghanistan, and Turkmenistan, or other countries that you don't even hear of, but still there in the world today. So this king of the north, king of the south scenario, this is important to understand this prophecy, because we're going to suddenly leap into the last days as springboarding from this king of the north, king of the south scenario empire. This is going to be largely revisited in the last days. So his the dominion in the north, the Seleucid Empire, his dominion shall be a great dominion. Look this up. You simply follow through in the history, and indeed it all plays out just as the angels said it would. Well, that really is, let's just leave it there, because I can see it's getting long again, and we're 45 minutes in already, just to explain those few short verses up to verse 5. Well, you've got the introduction there of the king of the north, king of the south. King of the north being the Seleucid world empire, king of the south being the Ptolemaic world empire of that day. Alexander the Great dies, his kingdom sliced up amongst his four generals. The two main players as following through on history here will be the king of the north, king of the south. And so the angel, in fact, in verse 6 goes on to give give history of how these two kingdoms would play out in these various wars between the king of the north, king of the south. So I think I better leave it there, because it's already getting a bit too long, and we're 46 minutes in already. And so we're now in verse 5, and we're going to jump into verse 6 in the next talk, and go into a lot more detail and a lot more history here, a lot of water under the bridge in history, and the angel telling Daniel the history of the world, and gives a lot more detail on the history of the world, as from the death of Alexander the Great, as from these four generals, king of the north, the Seleucid Empire, and the king of the south. And so he goes into the history of these. But the important thing to remember here, he gives a bit of background history of the king of the north, king of the south. And all this actually plays out in history, right? In the future, now it's in our past. And then the angel springboards into the future from verse 21. This is so crucial and important to remember. The angel's giving Daniel a bit of background history of the king of the north being the Seleucid world empire, and the kingdom of the king of the south being the Ptolemaic world empire. The land of Israel caught up in the middle of this. God's people indeed caught up in the middle of all of this. These various wars that would indeed break out between these two. And this being largely revisited in the last days with another king that will stand up in the north, in the northern regions of Israel, in the northern regions being somewhere in the vicinity of the Seleucid world empire, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences will stand up in that region in the last days. And so the angel, in short, what he's doing here is giving a bit of background to this. And then suddenly, the reason he's come, why did he come? He's come to give Daniel further understanding, to help him understand further of the last days and how this man of sin, this little horn, will one day stand up in the northern regions, in the north. This king of the north stands up, the Seleucid world empire, this king of the south, the Ptolemaic world empire, and the Antichrist will indeed stand up in the north. So this is what the angel is saying, and he's giving him a bit of background as to the history of the Seleucid world empire and the Ptolemaic world empire, and then he's going to suddenly springboard as from verse 21 right into the end times, right into the last days, and from then onwards he's going to go on to talk about the king of the north, the prince of the covenant, that prince of the covenant being the very Antichrist that will indeed stand up in the north. So praise Jesus.